When 10-year-old Maya Reyes dropped her phone for the third time in 5 minutes outside a busy Target in suburban Dallas, then looked up at the tattooed biker who'd been loading groceries into his motorcycle saddlebags and whispered 4 words that made his blood run cold. "Please help me run." The stranger saw what 100 shoppers rushing past had missed. The deliberate clumsiness wasn't accident-prone behavior. It was a desperate signal from a child who'd been taught stranger danger her whole life, but understood with absolute clarity that the two adults walking 20 feet behind her represented something far more dangerous than any stranger ever could. What started as a seemingly innocent phone drop in a parking lot would transform into a high-stakes game of keep-away that turned a Target shopping center into an impromptu safe zone, proved that children in crisis will engineer any opportunity to ask for help, and demonstrated that sometimes the scariest-looking person in the parking lot is exactly who a terrified 10-year-old needs when running out of time and options. The Target parking lot in Plano, Texas, was experiencing its typical Thursday afternoon chaos. Soccer moms loading SUVs with groceries and home goods, retirees navigating shopping carts with careful precision, teenagers grabbing after-school snacks, the perpetual dance of vehicles competing for spots near the entrance. It was early September, still brutally hot despite the sun beginning its afternoon descent, the kind of heat that made asphalt soft and turned metal shopping carts into instruments of torture if you touched them wrong. The parking lot was full of movement and noise and the everyday invisibility that came from too many people focused on their own tasks to notice anything beyond their immediate bubble. Jackson Cole Hayes stood beside his road glide, methodically loading grocery bags into saddlebags that had been custom designed for exactly this purpose. He was 52 years old, sergeant-at-arms for the Lone Star Riders Motorcycle Club out of Fort Worth, with shoulders like a defensive lineman and a completely bald head that showed intricate tattoo work creeping up from his neck. His full beard was mostly gray now, his arms covered in ink that told stories spanning 3 decades, and his black leather vest bore patches marking him as a man who'd found brotherhood on the road after conventional society had failed to hold his interest. The club ran clean, focused on veteran support and youth mentorship programs, and Hayes had been a member for 26 years after retiring from the Marines at 30. He'd ridden to Target because his truck was getting new tires and because sometimes a man just needed to be on 2 wheels instead of trapped in a cage. The grocery run had been practical, nothing special, just the weekly necessities that kept a single man fed. He was focused on distributing weight evenly in the saddlebags, making sure nothing would shift during the ride home, when he first noticed the girl. She was maybe 10 or 11 years old, Latina with long dark hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing denim shorts and a bright yellow t-shirt with some kind of cartoon character on it. She carried a phone in one hand and walked with a strange kind of deliberate slowness through the parking lot, not the casual pace of a kid with nowhere to be, but the calculated movement of someone who was trying very hard to appear normal while actually doing something else entirely. Behind her, maintaining what looked like a careful distance, were 2 adults. A man in his 40s with a neatly trimmed goatee, wearing cargo shorts and a polo shirt, and a woman in her 30s with bleached blonde hair, wearing athleisure clothing that screamed trying too hard. They weren't walking together exactly, but they weren't walking separately either, both of them keeping the same measured distance from the girl, both of them scanning the parking lot with eyes that moved too systematically to be casual. Hayes watched because his training had taught him to watch, because 20 years in the Marines and 26 years in an MC meant you learned to read situations through body language and positioning and the subtle wrongness that most people missed. The girl's shoulders were rigid despite her casual pace. Her free hand kept clenching and unclenching at her side. Her head turned every few seconds like she was looking for something specific, and twice Hayes saw her glance behind her at the 2 adults with an expression that was part fear and part calculation. Then the girl dropped her phone. It clattered onto the asphalt with the distinctive sound of plastic and glass hitting concrete, and she stopped walking to pick it up. The movement was clumsy, exaggerated, and she fumbled the phone when she first tried to grab it, making the retrieval take longer than it should have. The 2 adults behind her stopped walking too, maintaining their distance, both of them pulling out their own phones like they were checking messages while they waited. The girl finally got her phone, stood up, and continued walking in Hayes's general direction. 30 seconds later, she dropped it again. Same exaggerated fumble, same clumsy recovery, same pause while the adults behind her stopped and waited. Hayes felt something cold settle in his gut, that old instinct that had kept him alive in Fallujah and Kandahar, that had helped him spot trouble before it escalated in countless situations since. Kids dropped things, sure, but not like this. Not with this kind of deliberate repetition, not while glancing around the parking lot with desperate searching eyes. The girl was closer now, maybe 40 feet away, and Hayes could see her face more clearly. She was scared, absolutely terrified, but trying to hide it behind a mask of normalcy that was cracking at the edges. Her eyes swept across parked cars, across other shoppers, across the Target entrance, and then they landed on Hayes, on the massive biker in the leather vest loading groceries onto a motorcycle. The girl's expression shifted, showing something that looked like desperate hope mixing with fear, and she started walking more directly toward him. 20 feet away, she dropped the phone again. This time when it hit the ground, she looked directly at Hayes while she bent to pick it up, and he saw her mouth something silently. He couldn't make out the words from this distance, not with the ambient noise of the parking lot, but the desperation in her face was unmistakable. She grabbed the phone, stood up, and took several more steps toward him, close enough now that he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow like she'd been running even though she'd been walking. The two adults behind her had closed the distance slightly, no longer maintaining the careful buffer. The man's hand was moving toward his pocket. The woman had stopped looking at her phone and was watching the girl with an intensity that made Hayes's combat instincts scream danger. The girl was 15 feet from Hayes now, close enough that he could see tears welling in her eyes, close enough that when she dropped the phone for the fourth time, it landed almost at his feet. She bent down to pick it up, and when she straightened, she was close enough to touch his motorcycle, close enough that her whispered words carried clearly despite the parking lot noise. "Please help me run. They're not my family. They're going to take me and I can't get away. Please." Hayes's Marine training took over before his conscious mind finished processing. He stepped between the girl and the approaching adults, his size and presence creating an immediate barrier, his voice carrying the command authority that had once moved soldiers in combat zones. "Hey there, young lady. I think you dropped something again. You know, my daughter used to drop her phone all the time until we got her one of those grippy cases. Maybe you need one of those." He spoke loud enough for the approaching adults to hear, establishing his presence, making it clear this girl wasn't alone and unobserved anymore. The girl's eyes were huge, her small body trembling, but she played along with an intelligence that told Hayes she understood exactly what he was doing. "Yeah, I'm really clumsy today. I don't know what's wrong with me." Her voice shook, but she kept it together, this 10-year-old who was terrified but smart enough to recognize help when it appeared. The two adults reached them, and the man's smile was professional and practiced and completely failed to reach his eyes. "There you are, sweetie. We told you not to run ahead. You know Mom worries when you wander off." He looked at Hayes with that smile still fixed in place. "Thanks for keeping an eye on her. She's going through a phase where she thinks she's independent, but she's not quite ready for that yet." Hayes looked at the man, then at the woman who'd positioned herself on the other side of the girl like they were boxing her in, then back at the girl whose face showed naked terror despite the man's casual tone. Something was catastrophically wrong, and every instinct Hayes had developed over 52 years of reading people and situations was screaming that this child was in immediate danger. He made a decision that would either save a life or make him look like a paranoid fool. And either way, it didn't matter because the girl's whispered plea had been genuine and desperate, and Hayes wasn't walking away from that. "That's funny," Hayes said, his voice flat and hard, "because she just told me you're not her family and that you're trying to take her somewhere against her will. Now I could be wrong. Could be she's just acting out like kids do sometimes. But I think we should get someone official involved to sort this out." He pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. "Target's got security. Police respond quick to this shopping center. Let's just take 5 minutes and make sure everyone's where they're supposed to be with who they're supposed to be with." The man's professional smile cracked. "Sir, I don't know what she told you, but she's our daughter and she's going through some issues right now. We've got documentation. We're happy to show you, but we really need to get her home." His hand moved toward the girl's arm, and Hayes stepped closer, using his size to create space, his voice dropping to the tone that had once made Marines move faster. "Don't touch her, not until we verify this is legit, because if you're her parents, 5 minutes with security won't hurt anything. But if you're not, then we've got a serious problem, and you're not leaving with this kid." The woman's face had gone pale, and she was backing away slowly, her hand moving to her purse. The man's expression shifted from practiced friendliness to something harder, more desperate. "Sir, you're making a mistake. You're interfering with a family matter, and this could go badly for you. We have every right to take our daughter and leave." Maya, still standing between Hayes and his motorcycle, suddenly spoke up with a clarity that cut through the tension. "My name is Maya Reyes. I'm 10 years old. I live at 2847 Mockingbird Lane in Richardson with my mom, Jennifer Reyes, and my dad, Carlos Reyes. These people are not my parents. I don't know who they are. They grabbed me when I was walking home from school, and they've been driving me around for 2 hours telling me if I screamed or tried to run, they would hurt my family." I kept dropping my phone, hoping somebody would notice something was wrong. "Please don't let them take me. Please call the police." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in and finally had permission to release them, and Hayes watched the two adults' faces transform from practiced deception to pure calculation. The man's hand went fully into his pocket. The woman started moving faster toward her purse. Hayes hit the emergency call button on his phone and put himself completely between the adults and Maya, his voice carrying across the parking lot with deliberate volume. "I need police at the Target on West Park Boulevard in Plano immediately. I have a child reporting attempted abduction and 2 adults attempting to flee with her. I'm detaining them for law enforcement." The man made his decision in the split second that Hayes was focused on the phone. He lunged toward Maya, trying to grab her around Hayes's protective position, his face showing desperation that confirmed everything the girl had said. But Hayes had 20 years of combat experience and reflexes that hadn't dulled despite his age. He shifted his weight, used his shoulder to block the man's approach, and his voice boomed across the parking lot with command authority that made shoppers 50 feet away stop and turn. "This man is attempting to abduct a child. Someone call 911 and get Target security out here now." The parking lot that had been full of invisible individuals suddenly became a community. A woman near the entrance pulled out her phone. 2 men loading groceries into a truck started moving toward them. A teenager in a Target vest who'd been collecting shopping carts ran toward the store entrance, shouting for security. The woman with the bleached hair saw the situation deteriorating and made the choice to cut her losses. She turned and ran, sprinting between parked cars toward the far end of the lot where Hayes caught a glimpse of a white sedan with tinted windows. The man saw his partner flee and realized he was alone, surrounded by witnesses, with a massive biker blocking his access to the Target. His face contorted with rage and something that looked like genuine fear of consequences, and he threw a wild punch at Hayes that telegraphed so obviously that Hayes had time to pull Maya completely behind him and take the blow on his shoulder instead of his face. The hit was solid enough to hurt, but Hayes had taken worse in bar fights and combat zones, and he responded with a controlled shove that sent the man stumbling backward into a parked SUV. "Stay down," Hayes commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Police are coming, and you're not making this worse by assaulting people in a parking lot." The man looked at the growing crowd of witnesses, at the teenager sprinting back with 2 Target security guards, at Maya safely positioned behind Hayes's protective bulk, and some of the fight went out of him. He sagged against the SUV, breathing hard, his eyes scanning for escape routes that didn't exist anymore. Target security arrived first, 2 guards in red vests who took in the scene with practiced assessment. "We've got 911 on the line," one of them said. "Police are 3 minutes out." "What happened?" Hayes gave them the abbreviated version while keeping himself between the detained man and Maya. "Girl reported attempted abduction, dropped her phone multiple times as a signal for help, told me these 2 adults grabbed her after school and were driving her around, threatening her family if she asked for help. Female suspect fled toward the north parking area in a white sedan. This male attempted to grab the girl and assaulted me when I prevented it." Maya was crying now, quiet, desperate tears of relief and residual terror, her small body shaking. One of the security guards, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and grandmother energy, knelt beside her at a respectful distance. "Honey, you're safe now. Nobody's taking you anywhere except home to your parents. You did exactly the right thing getting help. You were so smart dropping your phone like that." The guard looked up at Hayes with profound respect. "And you, sir, you potentially just saved this child's life." The Plano police arrived in under 3 minutes. 2 patrol units that pulled into the parking lot with lights activated. 4 officers emerged and immediately separated everyone involved. 2 officers took control of the detained man, reading him his rights while securing him in handcuffs. A 3rd officer interviewed Hayes while the 4th, a female officer with crisis intervention training visible in her badge designations, sat down with Maya on a parking lot curb away from the detained suspect. Hayes explained what he'd observed to Officer Martinez, a veteran cop in his 40s who listened with the focused attention of someone who'd worked these cases before. The deliberate phone dropping, Maya's whispered plea, the way the 2 adults had boxed her in, their reaction when confronted, the female suspect's flight, and the male's assault when prevented from taking Maya. Officer Martinez took notes and watched Hayes's face the way cops did when evaluating credibility. And whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because his expression shifted from professional neutrality to genuine gratitude. "Sir, we've had reports of a possible abduction attempt at Richardson Elementary this afternoon. A 10-year-old girl, matching this child's description, was reported missing by the school when she didn't get on her bus and wasn't picked up by her parents." The officer paused, checking something on his radio. "Her parents have been frantically searching and filed a missing persons report about 90 minutes ago. If this is Maya Reyes, and preliminary identification suggests it is, you just ended what could have become a very different kind of situation." "How's she doing?" Hayes asked, looking over at where Maya sat with the female officer, still crying but talking, her small hands gesturing as she explained something. "She's scared, but she's communicating clearly, and she's physically unharmed as far as we can tell. Officer Chen is excellent with traumatized children. She'll get Maya's account and will coordinate with her parents." The officer studied Hayes more carefully, taking in the leather vest, the patches, the whole presentation of a man who existed outside conventional society. "You former military, sir. 20 years Marines, 3 tours between Iraq and Afghanistan." Martinez nodded like that explained everything he needed to know about why Hayes had read the situation correctly and acted without hesitation. "That tracks. You've got good instincts, and you trusted them when a lot of people would have talked themselves out of getting involved." He paused. "The girl specifically asked for your help. That's going to matter to her recovery, knowing that a stranger cared enough to intervene. You should know that." A 3rd police unit arrived, and officers began processing the scene, taking statements from witnesses who'd watched the confrontation, securing the area where the female suspect had fled, coordinating with units searching for the white sedan. The detained man was transported to the Plano Police Department for questioning and formal charges. Hayes stayed because Officer Martinez asked him to, because Maya kept looking over to make sure he hadn't left, and because walking away before knowing the girl was safely reunited with her real family felt fundamentally wrong. 27 minutes after Hayes had first called 911, a silver Honda pulled into the parking lot driving too fast and making turns too sharp, and a woman and man jumped out before the car had fully stopped. Jennifer Reyes was a small woman in her mid-30s with Maya's dark hair and the kind of terror-etched face that came from 90 minutes of imagining the worst possible scenarios. Carlos Reyes was taller, broader, with construction site dirt still on his work clothes, like he'd dropped everything and run. They saw Maya sitting with Officer Chen, and both parents made sounds that were part cry and part prayer. Maya saw them, and the careful composure she'd been maintaining through the questioning shattered completely. She stood up and ran to her parents with a child's absolute need for safety and familiar arms, and the reunion that happened in that Target parking lot broke something open in every witness who saw it. Jennifer dropped to her knees and caught Maya, wrapping her daughter in arms that shook with the force of relief and residual fear. Carlos folded around both of them, his face pressed into his daughter's hair while his shoulders heaved with sobs he wasn't trying to hide. They held each other like that for long minutes, while Officer Chen gave them space and privacy, while other witnesses looked away because watching that kind of raw emotion felt too intimate for public viewing. When they finally pulled apart enough to breathe, Jennifer Reyes looked around the parking lot with tear-streaked desperation until Officer Chen pointed her toward Hayes. That's the man who intervened. He's the one Maya asked for help. Jennifer walked over with Maya's hand clasped firmly in hers and Carlos right behind them. And when she reached Hayes, she couldn't speak at first, could only look at this massive stranger in leather who'd chosen to believe her daughter. "You saved my baby," she finally managed, her voice breaking on every word. "The school called me at 2:30 to say Maya never got on the bus. We've been driving around Richardson looking everywhere, calling everyone, imagining every terrible thing that could happen. And you saw something wrong. You listened when she asked for help. You kept her safe until we could get here." Her voice failed completely, and Carlos stepped in, his hand on his wife's shoulder, his own eyes red and streaming. "Mr. Hayes, the officer told us what you did. How Maya dropped her phone as a signal, how she asked you to help her run, how you blocked those people from taking her and held them until police arrived. Our daughter is safe because you paid attention when you could have just minded your own business. How do we thank you for that?" "You don't thank me," Hayes said, his own voice rougher than usual. "You just hold her close and make sure she knows she did everything right. She was smart and brave, and she engineered a way to ask for help when most kids would have frozen. You raised a strong kid." Maya stepped forward, her face still wet with tears, but her voice steadier now. "Mr. Hayes, I dropped my phone 6 times before you. 6 different people. Some of them looked at me funny, but they didn't stop. Some of them didn't even notice. But you noticed and you believed me. And you didn't let them take me." She paused, her small face showing wisdom beyond her 10 years. "My mom always told me if I was in real danger, I should ask anyone for help, even strangers. She said to look for police or firefighters or moms with kids or somebody who looked strong. When I saw you with your motorcycle and your vest, you looked strong, and I thought maybe you would help me. And you did." Hayes knelt down to Maya's eye level, bringing himself smaller and less intimidating despite his size. "You were the brave one, Maya. You kept your head, you found a way to signal for help, and you didn't give up even when people weren't seeing you. That's real courage. You remember that when you're processing what happened today. You saved yourself by being smart enough to keep trying until somebody listened." Jennifer pulled Hayes into a hug that was fierce and grateful and desperate, this stranger in leather who'd become their daughter's protector in a parking lot. When she stepped back, she said something that Hayes would carry with him. "My daughter was missing for 90 minutes, 1 hour and 30 minutes of the worst fear a parent can experience. And in that time, she was with people who wanted to hurt her, who threatened her family to keep her quiet, who were taking her somewhere we might never have found her. But she kept looking for a way out. She kept trying to signal for help. And you saw her when 6 other people didn't. You taught my daughter that asking strangers for help works, that people exist who will intervene for children they don't know, that she matters enough for someone to stop their day and potentially get hurt protecting her. That lesson is going to help her heal from this." Officer Martinez approached with information that made the situation's severity fully clear. The male suspect is Isaiah Crawford, wanted in 3 states for child exploitation and human trafficking. The female who fled is believed to be Sandra Vickers, his known associate. We've got units searching for her vehicle, and her photo is being circulated. Mr. Hayes, your intervention didn't just save Maya. Based on preliminary questioning, Crawford was planning to move her out of state tonight. If you hadn't stopped him when you did, we likely wouldn't have had another opportunity. The family stayed in the parking lot for another hour while police completed their processing, and Maya gave her full statement. Hayes stayed too, because Maya kept checking to make sure he was still there, because her parents insisted he wait so they could exchange contact information, and because leaving before knowing the complete outcome felt like abandoning a mission half finished. While they waited, Carlos bought Hayes a cold drink from Target, and they sat on the parking lot curb while Maya stayed close to her mother. "My daughter told me she dropped her phone on purpose," Carlos said quietly. "She said she learned in school that if you're in danger, you should try to make a scene or do something unusual to get attention. So she kept dropping her phone, hoping somebody would realize something was wrong. 6 people ignored her before you. 6 adults who either didn't notice or didn't care or didn't want to get involved. But you noticed, and you cared, and you got involved even though it could have gotten you hurt. He looked at Hayes with the raw gratitude of a father whose nightmare had been stopped just in time. You're family now. I mean that. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, you call us, because you gave us back our daughter, and there's no way to repay that except to be there if you ever need anything. Hayes thought about the word family, about the brothers in his MC who'd chosen him when blood relatives hadn't, about unexpected connections forged in crisis that became more real than conventional relationships. I'd like that, he said simply. I'd like to stay in touch, make sure Maya's doing okay as she processes this. 3 months later, Hayes rode his road glide to the Reyes home in Richardson on a Saturday morning. He'd stayed in contact with the family through regular check-ins, following Maya's progress through therapy designed for children who'd survived abduction attempts. The case against Isaiah Crawford had expanded into a federal trafficking investigation that connected to 17 other missing children cases across 5 states. Sandra Vickers had been apprehended at a border crossing 2 weeks after the parking lot incident. Both suspects were facing charges that would likely keep them imprisoned for the rest of their lives. Maya's deliberate phone dropping and Hayes' immediate intervention had broken open a network that law enforcement had been tracking for years. When Hayes pulled up to the house, Maya came out wearing a t-shirt she'd clearly picked for his visit. It showed a phone with a cracked screen and the words, "Drop it like it's hot, but sometimes it's a cry for help," printed across the front. The girl's face had color in it now, her smile genuine, though Hayes suspected she still had moments where the memory of those 90 minutes came back uninvited. Behind her came Jennifer and Carlos, both looking healthier than they had in that parking lot, though the shadow of what almost happened would probably never fully leave their eyes. Maya walked around the motorcycle with careful attention, while Hayes explained the different parts, what they did, why they mattered. When he showed her the newest patch he'd added to his vest, a small ribbon in teal and purple that represented trafficking awareness and survivor support, Maya touched it gently. "Is that for kids like me?" she asked. "That's for kids exactly like you," Hayes said. "To remember that we pay attention, that we believe children who ask for help, and that we act immediately when something feels wrong. Because you taught me something important, Maya." "What did I teach you?" she asked with the seriousness of a 10-year-old who'd survived something terrible and wanted it to mean something. "You taught me that kids in danger will find creative ways to signal for help if adults are watching carefully enough. You taught me that dropping a phone 6 times isn't clumsiness, it's desperation finding a voice. You taught me that the bravest thing a child can do is keep trying to be seen, even when people keep looking away. And you taught me that trusting my instincts and acting immediately matters more than worrying about looking foolish or interfering in what might be a family matter." Jennifer and Carlos invited Hayes inside for lunch, and they spent the afternoon like old friends who'd been forged into family through crisis. They talked about Maya's therapy, about the safety protocols she'd learned, about how the family had started volunteering with organizations that taught children abduction prevention strategies. Jennifer had become a vocal advocate for adults paying attention in public spaces, speaking at parent groups in schools about how children in danger often signaled in subtle ways that required observation and action. Before Hayes left that evening, Maya pulled him aside with something she wanted to show him. It was a journal her therapist had encouraged her to keep, processing her feelings about what happened. She opened to a page where she'd written in careful kid handwriting about the day in the Target parking lot. At the bottom, she'd drawn a picture of a motorcycle and a stick figure with a beard and vest, and the words, "Someone finally saw me," written underneath. "I want you to know what you did for me that day," Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of someone much older. "I was so scared and I kept trying to get help, but people weren't listening. And then you listened. You saw that something was wrong and you believed me, and you didn't let them take me." She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, but had also seen kindness. "My therapist says I'm healing because I learned that day that the world has good people in it who will help kids they don't even know. That asking for help works if you keep trying. That I wasn't alone even when I felt like I was. You taught me that." Hayes felt his eyes burning with unexpected emotion. "You taught me something too, Maya. You taught me that paying attention saves lives, that kids are smarter and braver than we give them credit for, and that sometimes the most important thing I can do is believe a 10-year-old who asks for help, even if it means causing a scene in a parking lot. You made me a better person. The story of the deliberate phone drops became something the Lone Star Riders MC carried as a reminder of why their community presence mattered. It wasn't just about visible support and charity rides. It was about being observant in everyday spaces, paying attention when children's behavior seemed off, being willing to intervene when something felt wrong even without concrete proof. They started a program called See the Signal, teaching community members to recognize when children were trying to communicate distress through unusual behaviors, training people to trust their instincts and act immediately rather than second-guessing themselves into inaction. Years later, when Maya turned 16, she showed up at a Lone Star Riders event with her parents. The girl had grown tall and confident, the trauma of that Target parking lot still part of her history, but no longer defining her entire identity. She'd become a peer counselor, specializing in helping younger kids who'd experienced trauma or close calls with danger. She gave presentations at schools about recognizing grooming behaviors, trusting your instincts when adults made you uncomfortable, and creative ways to signal for help when direct asking wasn't possible. She found Hayes among the bikes and brothers and pulled out something she wanted to share. It was a case for her phone, custom designed with a message printed on the back. Sometimes dropping your phone is the bravest thing you can do. Ask for help in whatever way you can. Someone is watching. Someone will care. I designed this because I never want to forget, Maya said. I never want to forget that the worst 90 minutes of my life taught me that strangers can become heroes, that asking for help works if you keep trying, that people exist who will stop everything to make sure a scared kid gets home safe. You taught me that in a parking lot when you could have convinced yourself I was just a clumsy kid having a bad day with her parents. You taught me by believing me immediately and acting without hesitation. That's worth remembering and sharing. Hayes looked at this young woman who'd been a terrified 10-year-old engineering desperate signals in a parking lot, who'd been smart enough to keep trying after 6 people ignored her, who'd grown into someone who wanted to help other kids feel less alone in their fear. Your parents raised somebody extraordinary, he said. You're taking the worst thing that happened to you and using it to help protect other children. That's real strength. But Maya shook her head slightly. You helped raise me too. You and Officer Chen and my therapist and everyone who showed up that day. You showed me what it looks like when adults take children's signals seriously, when they act to protect instead of assuming everything's fine. You showed me the community happens when people decide to notice strangers in trouble. That's the kind of person I want to be. Because that was the truth that mattered most, that one person paying attention in a parking lot could stop a trafficking attempt before the child disappeared across state lines. That trusting the gut feeling when a kid dropped her phone 6 times in 5 minutes was worth the risk of misreading an innocent situation. That causing a scene and potentially interfering in what might have been a family matter was a microscopic price compared to a child vanishing into networks designed to make people disappear forever. The children in crisis would engineer whatever signals they could manage with whatever tools they had available. And adults had an absolute obligation to see those signals, to interpret them correctly, to act on them without delay or self-doubt. The story became part of how the Lone Star Riders understood their presence in the communities they rode through. It was being observant in ordinary spaces like parking lots and gas stations and grocery stores. It was watching for the subtle wrongness that indicated danger, even when surface appearances suggested normalcy. It was being the kind of people who children instinctively recognized as safe and strong enough to help when help was desperately needed. It was understanding that leather and tattoos and motorcycles could represent protection just as surely as uniforms and badges, that sometimes the most unlikely guardian was exactly who someone needed when conventional help wasn't available or wouldn't arrive in time. Share this story if it reminds you that children in public spaces sometimes engineer creative signals for help that require us to truly observe their behavior. Subscribe for more stories proving that paying attention to unusual patterns can stop tragedies before they escalate, that trusting your instincts about child safety is always worth potential embarrassment, and that immediate action matters more than social anxiety about interfering. Comment and tell others about the importance of teaching children that signaling for help works if they keep trying, that their safety matters more than politeness or obedience, and that somewhere in every crowd are people watching who will act if given the chance. Your awareness matters because traffickers and predators count on adults dismissing unusual behavior as innocent clumsiness, on social conditioning that makes people avoid getting involved in others' business, on the assumption that surely someone else will handle it if something's actually wrong. Every person willing to notice when a child drops her phone 6 times in 5 minutes, to believe that behavior means something beyond accident-prone tendencies, and to intervene immediately without waiting for perfect proof, becomes part of the solution that brings children home instead of letting them vanish into nightmares that start in ordinary parking lots on ordinary Thursday afternoons.